No, it is enough. In the example, of course, not. But what you mean in Advaita Vedanta, it is awareness. Aware of itself is a tricky question. In philosophy, this is a problem of self-reflexivity. Can anything make of itself an object? Can a knife cut itself? In philosophy, this is seen as a fault. A thing cannot operate on itself. So in Advaita Vedanta, the way we get around this is, there's a concept called self-luminosity. It's like, just like the eyes can see everything, but they cannot see themselves. Similarly, awareness reveals everything as an object. And in doing so, that constitutes its self-revelation. Let me explain a little further. How do I know that I have eyes? How do I know anything here exists? Because I see it. How do I know that the book is here? Because I see it. What is the proof of the existence of the book? I see the book. What is the proof of the existence of the bottle? I see the bottle. What is the proof of the existence of anything? It's I see it. But now if I ask, what is the proof of the existence of the eyes? I can't say I see it. Then how do I know that eyes exist? Because?
I see with it. I see it.
True. How do I know the book exists? Because I see the book. Seeing something is the proof that it exists for us day to day. Seeing what is the proof that eyes exist? Seeing? Which object?
All the objects are.
Any object, yes. Seeing any object. See, seeing a bottle is not a proof that the book exists. Seeing the book is not a proof that the bottle exists. But seeing anything is the proof that eyes exist. That I have eyes and that they are working well, that's proved by seeing anything at all. If you understand what eyes are and the concept of how eyes work. Similarly, consciousness. You are aware of something, it's a proof of the existence of that something. At least it's a proof that you are experiencing it. But what is the proof of awareness? Being aware of what will tell you that you are aware.
So then is awareness only aware when it has an object of awareness?
So there's a question. I'll come to that. So conclusion is awareness of anything is proof that you are aware, that there is awareness. And it doesn't matter what object it is. That's how this meditation technique works, which we did last time. That any object in the mind, take it up and then notice that you are aware of it. Doesn't matter what the object is. Now, does awareness only work when there is an object to awareness? You would say not. Yeah, the possibility of the recognition of awareness as awareness and the possibility of recognition of objects or illumination of objects will be there when there are objects. However, the existence of awareness continues regardless of whether objects appear or disappear. There is no proof to show that awareness disappears along with the object. Knowledge of the objects arises and subsides with the objects. But awareness does not arise or subside with the objects. We are here in deep waters of non-duality. So here there is a very subtle debate, very prominent in Tibetan Buddhism, in Madhyamaka, Shunyavada. The great dialectician Nagarjuna and his disciple Chandrakirti. Nagarjuna nearly 2000 years ago, Chandrakirti nearly 1400, 1500 years ago. Chandrakirti commented on Nagarjuna. He uses an example which you will not find in Vedanta. The example is of sheaves of hay leaning on each other. Take out one sheaf, what will happen to the other? It will fall. Two things leaning on each other. Subject and object. He says any duality means both are false. So subject and object lean on each other. And the subtlest experience you have is that question. You will come to this question where does awareness depend on an object? Objects depend upon awareness. at least for their recognition, for their experience. Does awareness depend on the object?
No.
Yes and no. What does awareness do? What does the object do for awareness, and what does awareness do for the object? What awareness does for the object is, awareness illumines the object. It reveals the object. What does the light do for an object? It reveals this. If you switch off every light, you won't be able to see this. The light illumines the object. This one. But what does the object do for the light? We have never thought of it that way. The object manifests light. You know what it means? Between me and that light, it just seems like space. It's flooded with light. It doesn't seem like that. Notice this. My hand is shining. See? My hand is shining right now. You can see bright shining in my hand. Have I got occult powers? Is my hand radiating light? Where did this light come from, which is coming from my hand right now? Where did it come from? You say it was there, Swami. Your hand is just reflecting it. Notice what happens when I remove my hand. There is no shining here. Look, there is shining here. And if I remove my hand, there is no shining. It's just empty space. But it's not empty space. It's full of light. It needs an object to manifest that light. We remove this. I did it very brightly in a place as august as Nalanda University. There was a conference on consciousness, and their professors, they were using a projector, for PowerPoints. The projector projects a very strong, narrow beam of like white light. So at that moment, when I was talking about this, I got this brainstorm, brain wave. What I did was, I saw the beam of light going there to the screen. I thrust my hand into the wave, into the beam of light, and my hand blazed white with light. When I remove my hand, you can't see anything there, just plain empty space. But when I put my hand in that beam, I sort of vaguely know where the beam is going. You suddenly see my hand blazing with light, like it's blazing with light right now. Which means that space where it is not evident it's full of light, is actually blazing with light. But you need an object to manifest that light. Therefore, the great conclusion is, objects are illumined by consciousness. They depend on consciousness for revelation, for illumination, for experience, for being experienced. And consciousness is manifested by these objects, but consciousness is not given existence by the objects. It exists regardless of the objects. If there are no objects, think about our own experience. If there is no experience, if there is nothing in the world, there is no body, there is no sensory activity, no thoughts in the mind, you won't even be aware of yourself. There would be no self-reflective awareness, but you would still be there. And only when objects arise, you become aware of the objects. And if you know Vedanta, if you know Sankhya and Yoga, you become aware of yourself using this Vedantic technique. So the great conclusion is, then there is something that consciousness depends on objects for. Right? Yeah, I understand. Objects are manifested by consciousness, but consciousness is also manifested by objects. Then isn't Chandrakirti and Nagarjuna right? Aren't they like sheaves of hay? No. Not even in English, no. It is the American no. Why? There lies the mystery of non-duality. Because it's not that consciousness depends on objects for anything at all. Because those objects are nothing but consciousness. They are in no way independent of consciousness. There comes the non-duality. The consciousness appears as its own objects. And the Tibetan Buddhists know this very well. In Mahayana Buddhism, especially Tibetan Buddhism, in Dzogchen, the entirety of all phenomena, they appear, that's their language, appear in the basic space of awareness. They are like illusions, like magic, like dreams. They appear and disappear in the basic space of awareness. They are nothing other than that awareness itself. And what is that? This union, they call it the union of the void and light. The clear light of the void. They call it the void, shunyata, and the basic awareness. Basically, it is the Sanskrit term chidakasha, the sky of awareness. That is Atma. But that's way beyond what we have set out to do today. That's non-duality. Right now, it seems like duality. Consciousness depending on objects. Consciousness depending on nature. Nature depending on consciousness. This is the duality of Sankhya. Sankhya stops here. Yes, they are quite happy to say consciousness depends on objects. And objects depend on consciousness. The language is Purusha and Prakriti. Consciousness principle and matter principle. They depend on each other. Consciousness by itself does nothing. All action is done by the universe, by nature. Everything. External universe, this body and brain, all of that. And mind. Even that's part of nature. And consciousness, what does consciousness do then? What's its function? How do we even know that it's consciousness? By one thing and one thing only. Bhoga, first person experience. Pleasure, pain, understanding, the feeling of life itself. This is the name of a book by the leading neuroscientist of the age today. One of the leading. Christoph Koch, the brain scientist in the Paul Allen Brain Institute. His latest book is called The Feeling of Life Itself. What is the feeling of life itself? Consciousness. That's what consciousness does. No other function. Every other function, including thinking, memory, intellect, all creativity, all of that is done by nature. Proof. There's a very nice proof now. Just a few days ago in San Francisco, I saw these self-driving cars. It's uncanny. This is the guy who, without more uncanny than there is no driver, no passenger. It's just wheeling along by itself. It is sensing everything around it better than everybody else. It's taking decisions better than every driver. Somebody who went on a self-driving car, Swami, said how precisely it maintained in the middle of the road. No human driver could do that. And I've seen in NYU, a professor was showing us pictures of paintings created by artificial intelligence and paintings created by human beings. You cannot distinguish. Creativity, which we at one time we thought is entirely the province of human beings. Computers are doing it now. What's your point, Swami? There's one thing they cannot do. They are not even close to doing. Not even close. They have no idea about how to do that. What's that one thing? First person experience. The feeling of life itself. In Sanskrit, anubhava. In English, the common word, experience. Are computers internally experiencing anything at all while driving the car, while painting, while doing Google Translate? Are they feeling anything? Feeling, emotion, idea, any kind of inner first-person experience? Nothing. There's no inner life there. So, Swami, how are you so sure? I'm not sure. You ask, you're right at the right place. Ask the Silicon Valley, the experts. They will all tell you. We can explain decision making, we can explain sensory inputs, we can explain even creativity, what the machines are doing when they're doing that. There is no question of first person experience. We don't even know how to begin to program that. We have no idea what it is. That's what consciousness contributes. This is the so-called hard problem of consciousness. David Chalmers coined that term. That how is it we're getting this experience? The feeling of life itself. And in Vedanta there's a term, Anubhava Matra Param Brahma. Experience itself is the ultimate reality. You say, oh really, what experience? Not what experience. All experience in any experience, in every experience, if you leave the objective side out of it, all you get remaining is consciousness itself. You still say, but then there's consciousness plus object? Yes, but in non-duality, the object is not an independent reality apart from consciousness. Ultimately, it's consciousness only. And that is the ultimate nature of all experience. The ultimate reality, and that's you. That's the meaning of Tattvamasi, that thou art. Again, I'm glad to see it. All your tendencies are towards non-duality, but I'm holding back. Right now, we are taking the first step in this. Before we get there, there are some deep questions to be solved. We must not be in a hurry. If you are in a hurry, then non-duality will not make sense. So it sounds like a crazy theory that there is no second reality. We see so many second realities. We see multiple realities. How can you reconcile all of this which is happening to one limitless consciousness? How the two say? Because Advaita Vedanta is not saying that there is one Atman or Brahman somewhere and here is the world. It's saying this itself is that one Atman or Brahman. And what is that one Atman? Limitless awareness. But it does not seem to be limitless awareness. We don't seem to be witness consciousness. How does that happen? So 4 questions I will take up in this session. 4 questions. I will follow the text. 4 questions, important questions. What are the 4 questions? Question 1, how is it that we come to be these embodied body minds? You're saying we are pure consciousness, but how is this happening? That's one question. The second question is, what is it that Vedanta actually does? I understand what the idea is behind devotion, bhakti. I sort of understand what is the idea behind meditation, yoga. You do meditation, attain samadhi and so on. But what exactly is Vedanta doing? What does it aim to do? Second question. How does it work? Third question is, if I am awareness, how do you explain the 3 states of waking, dreaming, deep sleep? And the 4th question is, what is all this about life, death, rebirth? What's happening there? How does consciousness explain all of that? So these 4 questions. Question 1, how do we come to be embodied? How does pure consciousness, witness consciousness come to be an embodied being? How do we feel this, I am this body mind? Second, what does Vedanta do exactly? Third, waking, dreaming, deep sleep. How does consciousness explain that? What's the relationship between consciousness and waking, dreaming, deep sleep? And last, this whole question of births and deaths and all of that. So these 4 questions, we will proceed. At the end of this session, I hope those important groundwork will have been done. Groundwork for what? Non-duality. When do we get to that? Not this time. But most of you are there. Most of your questions are actually pointing towards that.
Well, next year.
Yes, sure. And by the way, right now I'm going to go to verse number 6. So, Swami, what about verses 2, 3, 4, and 5? We've already done that. If you look at what we did in the first session, we already did verses 2, 3, 4, 5. They talked about the senses perceiving the variety of objects, then all the senses being perceived by the mind, then the mind being illumined by consciousness, and consciousness not being an object. Those are the verses 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, verse 6. We're going to answer 4 questions. Verse 6. Chichaya veshato buddho, chichaya veshato buddho, bhanam dhistu dvidha sthita, bhanam dhistu dvidha sthita, ekaham kritiranya syat, ekaham kritiranya syat, antakarana rupini, antakarana rupini. It says, now let's consider the mind. Traditionally in Vedanta, the mind, what do I mean by the mind? Right now, the internal first-person experience we are having, comprised of thoughts, emotions. What do I mean by first-person experience? That part which the doctor can't see. The doctor can see the body, and with machines and scanning can see inside the body also. But no doctor can actually capture a thought or an emotion or an idea. So now, Swami, don't you know about the latest neural imaging techniques? Neural imaging techniques. They detect tiny bits of electrical activity in the neurons. Not your reaction to a cup of coffee or a feeling of happiness. None of that. Anyway, so the mind, the seat of emotions, ideas, the ego, and memories, all of that. So traditionally Vedanta divides it into 4 components based on function. Mano, buddhi, chitta, ahankara. Mana literally means mind. So what does the mind, mana do? The manas, I'll use the Sanskrit term, manas. All sorts of mental processing. In Sanskrit it's called sankalpa vikalpatmakam mana. All sorts of mental processing. So when you're trying to solve a mathematical problem, the mind is churning away. When you're trying to understand what is this Swami saying, the mind is churning away. When it comes to a flash of understanding, That's called intellect, buddhi. That's knowledge. That's treated as a separate faculty, a separate function. Buddhi, intellect, knowledge. Then there is a storehouse of past experiences, traces, called memory, or in Sanskrit, chitta. Mana, buddhi, chitta, which the mind continuously draws upon to formulate a worldview. So a lot of things are stored, packed in there. So a lot of it is rubbish, but anyway, it's packed in there. The world has left its traces, its marks upon us. Not only in this life, many lifetimes. That's chitta. And finally, there is an integrative function which takes all these activities going on and says, I. That is ego. That's also a function of the mind. It's just a thought in the mind. The ego is just, we make it so important. I, me, mine. It's a thought in the mind. Proof, every time you fall asleep, it disappears. It disappears. It's a thought, it's a function of the mind. Knock the mind out, put the mind into a coma, into anesthesia, into deep sleep, it will disappear. Deep meditation, the ego disappears. It's a function of the mind. What function is it? Abhimanatmika antakarana vritti ahankara. It is the integrating, appropriating function, that which gives unity to a set, to the mind, intellect, memory. Thoughts come up in the mind, I think. Understanding comes in the mind, I get it. Trying to remember something, memory functions, I remember. Desire arises in the mind. I desire, I want. Annoyance comes in the mind. I am annoyed, I'm mad. I. That's an integrative function. That's the normal classification. Here, on purpose, the author has done a simpler classification. He's using it for a particular, this classification which he has done is sort of operational. He wants to do something with this classification. He says, let's not bother with all of that. Just say, the mind has two parts. One is the ego, I, and the other is the rest of it, whatever else is happening. Intellect, memory, ideas, emotions, whatever. Just call it antakarana, the inner instrument, and ego, I. So he says, consciousness is reflected in the mind. Chaya, he calls it chidabhasa, the shadow of consciousness. Just like sun is reflected. See, everywhere, everything is reflecting sunlight. But an image of the sun is found only in certain substances. The rock reflects sunlight, but the water not only reflects sunlight, but also forms a little image of the sun. And notice, the image of the sun functions a little bit like the sun itself. It can illumine. If you take a shiny plate from outside and focus sunlight, you'll see a beam of sunlight come into this room. And the beam of sunlight does a little bit of the work of the sun. It can, wherever you focus it, it illumines different things. So this chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. What is this reflected consciousness? The mind works like a shiny plate and reflects consciousness, so to say, within quotes. And all of this, remember, it's all experiential. Right now you're experiencing the ego. I am listening. Listening is partly sense organ, partly the mind. And then I, the ego. And all of it is shining with awareness. I'm aware. That's the reflected awareness. He calls it the shadow of awareness. Chit chaya. Another term for that, more commonly used, chidabhasa, reflected consciousness. So what do we have now? Three things. Mind, which reflects consciousness, chidabhasa, first thing. Second, the mind itself is divided into two by him. One is the ego, the feeling of I which we have, and the other is just the rest of it. All the other stuff that goes on in the mind. Emotions, memories, intellect, all of that. So these two things. This verse has set up the groundwork, the machinery with which he is going to answer the four questions which we have. Let's go on. 8th verse. No. What did I do? The 7th verse. Chaya hankarayor aikyam. Chaya hankarayor aikyam. Taptaya pindavanmatam. Taptaya pindavanmatam. Tadahankara tadadmya. Tadahankara tadadmya. Dehasche seventh one. Now, this answers the first question. How do we end up feeling like this? I understand witness consciousness, but it doesn't feel like it. And why do we have to go through all this process to understand that? Why does it automatically feel like I am this body-mind? Because of this process. What happens is, the ego, it shines with reflected consciousness. The chaya means reflected consciousness, chit chaya, reflection of consciousness, or the shadow of consciousness. Ahankara, the ego, is a function of the mind. It's a function of the mind, the ego, the I sense, it also is aware. Not only I am, but I am aware. This I am aware. The aware part of it is reflected consciousness. And the I am is the ego. It's a function of the mind. And he says it's like an iron ball heated. It's a classic example used in Vedanta. An iron ball heated to, it's red hot. When you say red hot iron ball, it's a mixture of two entities, fire and iron. The red hot iron ball, I've seen it in a foundry. This iron glows. But iron doesn't have light. The iron ball doesn't have light. When you say it is glowing red, that light comes from fire. It's extremely hot. The heat comes from fire. But it's round. That round comes from the iron ball. It's heavy. The heavy comes from the iron ball. The ego is like that. The ego, when it shines with reflected awareness, the awareness comes from consciousness, you. You lend awareness to the ego. But that form of it, I, that belongs to the ego. That's the mind. Now this, like the red hot iron ball, this lit up ego, what it does, what's its function? Identification, appropriation. It's now identified with all the thoughts which are going on in the mind. And says, I am happy. I get it, Swami. You don't get it. You are the witness, you are the shining consciousness, shining on the mind. In the mind is the ego vibrating, and it's saying, and it's lit up by you, by your light. And it says, I get it. You're smiling on the ego. Good. You got it at last. And the ego is connected. I get it, that understanding. It's the intellect. That I is the ego. And both are now lit up by consciousness. The reflected consciousness in the ego is now transmitted to the intellect, because the ego has the capacity to get identified. It gets identified with various activities of the mind. So it is now identified with the intellect, which is, got it, I got it. Emotions, I am now happy because I got Vedanta. I am feeling uncomfortable. The body, discomfort in the body, I. And it's all a conscious feeling. From the ego, from you, the pure consciousness, the ego is lit up. From the ego, the intellect, the memory, the emotions, all are lit up by the reflected light of awareness. And that is carried in this body to the extent of this brain and nervous system. Remember, that ego with its awareness, it stops at the tip. The Upanishad says, the tip of the nails, anakagra. I'm no longer identified, but I'm not identified with the seed or anything beyond my body. It stops where the subtle body, the mind, is being carried by the nervous system. To that extent it exists. To that extent it can work. It transmits itself down to this physical living body. And now, it's like a person looking at oneself in a mirror and forgetting oneself and thinking, I am the person in the mirror. Mirror is the living body. The face in the mirror is the reflected consciousness. It's as if that has taken on a life of its own and you've forgotten yourself. That's the person. That's the individual person. So he says, Chaya Ahankara Aikyam. The identity of reflected consciousness and the ego is like a red hot iron ball. It's a classic example, and you're expected to understand what's meant by that. Part of that is the reflected consciousness, part of that is the functioning of the mind, just like the iron ball and the fire there. Tadahankara tadatmya. Because of the identity caused by the ego. That's a function of the ego. It keeps appropriating things. Everything else in the mind and body now become identified with the ego. and it says, I am all this, and it feels conscious. This is what's going on. That's the answer to the first question. Make a clear distinction between consciousness and knowledge. It's the ego deploying the instruments of knowledge. Eyes, when the ego sees with the help of the eyes. And this whole experience is lit up by you, the consciousness, functioning through the reflected consciousness in the ego. Ego hears. So it is you, with the instrumentality of the ego, which is ultimately responsible for all seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting. You, the consciousness, without eyes and ears, and you hear and smell and taste and touch, because what does it mean? You, consciousness, are powering all of this. And yet, it has nothing to do with you. So, up to the physical body, everything feels aware and conscious because of the functioning of the ego. Remember, when the ego shuts down, your identity with this body is lost. When does the ego shut down? Every day when you fall asleep. In deep meditation, you lose awareness of the body. So, your connection with the body is snapped. You, the witness consciousness, when the ego stops being identified with the body. Alright. Now, the second question. If this is so, it's all worth thinking about. If this is so, what does Vedanta do actually? It is a beautiful bit of analysis. The beauty of this analysis is, it doesn't ask you to focus on yourself as pure consciousness. It just asks us to focus on what is available to us, the ego. It's all available. Ego is available to us at every moment. Let us feel I. It's good. Stick with that. Stick with that I. Now, there are three things which we should notice. What is the connection of this I which we all feel right now? I. We will try to locate it. We found it here. Or here, wherever you like. This I. What is its relationship? 1. With the body. 2. With reflected consciousness. 3. With the real consciousness, pure consciousness. This I, catch hold of the I which is present to us, all of us, at every moment. What is the relationship of the I with this body? And what is the relationship, what's the nature of the relationship of the I with reflected consciousness? What's the reflected consciousness which you are feeling right now? You are feeling aware, right? We feel not only I, the I is also aware. The vertical I, not this side. The vertical I, it's aware. So this awareness is reflected consciousness. What's the relationship between the I and the reflected? It's a very subtle question. The two appear to us together, but they are not one, they are two actually. What's the relationship between them? And ultimately, what's the relationship between this ego, which we all feel, and the pure consciousness which Vedanta is trying to teach us? If we understand the relationship, maybe we can trace it back to our real nature. So now it answers. 8th verse. Ahankarasya tadatmyam Ahankarasya tadatmyam Chitchaya deha sakshibhi Chitchaya deha sakshibhi Sahajam karmajam bhranti Sahajam karmajam bhranti Janyam cha trividham kramat Janyam cha trividham kramat. The ego is identified with reflected consciousness, with the body, and with pure consciousness, you. How? What is the relationship, the nature of relationship in each case? Which case is three identification. You are identified with this body. We all feel, I am this body. I have a peculiar identification with this body, which I don't feel with anything else. I don't even feel it with my clothes. Right? Definitely feel it with this physical body. What's the nature of I, the ego? I am identified with the body. What's the nature of this identification? How will it go? Where does it come from? Second, I, the ego, feel aware. So what is my connection with, you are telling me, Vedanta is telling me this awareness which I feel right now is reflected awareness. It's not the original consciousness. It's reflected awareness. What's my connection with reflected awareness? I, the ego, how am I connected to this reflected awareness? Where did it come from? How will it go? And finally, I am identified with Atman. The ego is identified with the Atman, with my real nature. So I am there anyway. My real nature must be right here. But what is the relationship between what I feel myself to be right now, ego, and what Vedanta is trying to tell me that you are Atman, Brahman, witness consciousness? What's the link? And he says, 3 types of relations. 3 natures of the different relations. One is natural, One is born of karma, one is born of mistake, ignorance. What does that mean? He's going to tell us now. How can we snap these identifications? So how can we get free of these three, like there are three bondages? How do we get free? 9th verse. Sambandhino sator nasti, Sambandhino sator nasti, Nivritti sahajasyato, Nivritti sahajasyato, Karmakshayat prabodhacha, Karmakshayat prabodhacha, Nivartete kramadubhe, Nivartete kramadubhe. Okay. I'm not translating word by word, I'm just giving you the meaning of these verses. First, the relationship between I, the ego, which we feel now, and that it's aware, relationship between ego and the reflected consciousness is what he calls a natural relationship. What kind of relationship? Between a mirror and the reflected face. Whenever there is a mirror in front of you, there will be a reflected face. If you have a face and a mirror, the face will be reflected in the mirror. Now you're asking, what is the relationship between the mirror and the reflected face? It's natural. As long as there is a mirror, there is going to be reflection. As long as there is all pervading consciousness and an ego comes in, the ego will be lit up by awareness. As long as the ego exists and awareness exists, the ego will feel aware. It will be, I am and I am aware. I exist. Awareness, existence will come naturally. Descartes will say, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I exist. This is ego with reflected consciousness. See how deeply they have gone into this. Descartes didn't stop. He discovered this and then he quickly went back outside into the world. Vedanta says, stop, stay with this. There are amazing things to be discovered here. The secret of the universe lies here. So ego shines with reflected consciousness. It's like a mirror and a face. The reflected face and the mirror have a natural relationship. As long as you have a mirror, there will be a reflected face. Shut down the mirror, cover it up, break it, turn it upside down, the reflection will disappear. Let the ego go to sleep, deep sleep, no reflected awareness. That's why deep sleep feels like no awareness. Because the only kind of awareness we are acquainted with or we understand is reflected awareness, this one. When it disappears, I think there is no awareness at all. Deep sleep, coma, anesthesia. What's happening there? The mirror is turned upside down, the mirror is covered with a black cloth. Therefore, there is no reflected face in the mirror. Does that mean the face has disappeared? No, not at all. So anyway, it's a natural relationship. And he says, Sambandhino sator nasti nivritti sahajasyatu. As long as the two terms in a relationship are there, a natural relationship, it will always be there. As long as there's an ego and there's consciousness, the ego will feel consciousness. The ego will be lit up by reflected consciousness. As long as there's a mirror, there'll be a reflected face. Okay. How will it go? Cover the mirror, turn off the ego, switch off the ego. How do I switch off the ego? Go to sleep. Or in deep meditation, or in deep concentration. Ego will disappear. Okay. Second, karmakshaya. Karmakshaya. The ego is related to this body. How will the relationship with the body go? It will go only at the end of the body. As the body has been produced by our past karmas, as long as past karmas upon us, till the exhaustion of those karmas, this ego will be identified with the body. What does that mean? Death. It just means death. Until this body dies, the ego, this I will be related to this body. Because this I has been rooted in this body by past karma, prarabdha karma. Oh, but don't enlightened people feel that they are not the body, not the mind? Then Shankaracharya is saying, I am pure consciousness. How is that possible? We'll see. But this ego will always be related to the body. Which ego? This ego which we feel. It will always be related. Because it's been rooted, it's been grounded in this body by past karma. and it will lose contact with this body when this body dies. At that time, they can take this body and burn it or bury it or do whatever with it. I will know, the ego will no longer be concerned because the ego will be on its own trip to future bodies and other births and other worlds. No longer. I met this, what they call a shaman in the Native American tradition, a shaman. A shaman. So he told us this very touching story. This was in Dallas. There was a conference on near-death experiences. So a lot of material has been accumulated. The professor gave a talk on all the material that has been accumulated on this possibility of out-of-body near-death experiences. And this shaman told us a very touching story. And I can tell you there were no dry eyes at the end of that little anecdote about death and departing from this body. What departs from the body? The ego. So this little girl had a terrible accident which made her brain dead, that kept her alive on life support, and finally the doctors told the parents, it's impossible, we cannot bring her back, so let her go, withdraw the life support, and she will go. She was like maybe 9 or 10 years old. So the parents, they invited the priest and the shaman also, who was known to them, that you perform some your rites according to your tradition, so that for the onward journey of the soul of the sentient beings, their little child. And the life support was withdrawn. I mean, the girl was brought to the home from the hospice, and the life support was withdrawn in the presence of the lawyer, the police, and the lawyer, so I think doctor. And the shaman said, we had performed the rituals, and then I had come out to the lawn, sitting with some others, and I saw everybody was leaving. We thought, that's the end. After some time, we saw a flurry of activity, and the police and the lawyer, the cars came rushing back. There was a flurry of activity in the house, and we didn't know what had happened. And then we were called back in. All of us were called back in. Something amazing had happened. They pulled up the life support, and the heart and the lungs, breathing and all came back on again. And she started to breathe, and heart's breathe started by itself. Now she was living without life support. Now she's still brain dead, no reaction to anything at all. But she's not dying physically. You see the problem that's been created for the doctor and the lawyer. You can't now suffocate or kill the child, and yet she won't die. And yet there's no response at all, no brain response, nothing. So this shaman is supposed to be able to communicate with the sentient being, the jiva. So the parents said, can you do something? And he said, I can try. And then he said, I was clearly, this is all, I believed it. He was himself totally convinced of it, and it was very touching. He said, and when he was talking, he said, every time I tell the story, I cry. I talked to that little girl. She was there in her presence, I felt her. And she told me clearly that I want to go, but my mother is going to cry. So tell her that I'm fine, I will go away, and she shouldn't cry. It's all right. So Shaman said, I called the parents, and especially to the mother, sit with the girls, with the child, and talk to her. It feels that she's not listening, but she is listening. Tell her that you're fine, you've understood, and she can go on and be happy, and you will be all right with it. Tell her to go away. And so the mother did that. And he said, you believe it or not, we were watching all the monitors. Slowly the breathing subsided, heartbeat stopped, and she was gone. And she said, I felt the presence leave the room. So as long as this body exists, the ego is tied to it, the individual being. Karma kshaya, until the prarabdha karma goes, will be tied to it. When this body dies, you'll be set free from it. I'll be set free from it. But this individual being goes away. But still propelled by past karma into newer bodies. So it's not good news really, into other lives. Now, none of this is Vedanta. It's an important thing to understand. Now it's coming what Vedanta does. Prabodhatya nivartate kramatume. by illumination. He says, what does this mean? What is the link between this ego and you, the pure consciousness? And the answer here is stupidity. Stupidity, foolishness, ignorance. You have nothing to do with this little thing called the ego and its mind and its body. Nothing. And yet, it is entirely dependent on you. It exists, the mind works, the ego works, and gets tied to bodies, performs actions, prepared by karma, goes from lifetime to lifetime, all in your presence, in your radiance. You have no connection with it. You are like a person watching a movie, we are like a person watching a movie, and forgotten our own existence, and become immersed in the character in the movie. In fact, there's this book, I forget the name, this author, he gives an example, excellent example. This is probably the best-selling book on meditation in the last few years. He gives this example from Vedanta. He says, what a very modernized example. He says, imagine you've gone to a movie hall, and it's like cutting edge technology. It's dark, and the movie starts, it's 3D. It's immersive, virtual reality. You go into it and look around and see people around as if you're right there. Not only that, not only you see and its depth and 3D, and you hear, it's got movement also. You feel, if you touch something, there's pushback. They took me a couple of years back in MIT Media Labs. I hope I don't get people into trouble. There are like technologies which are still proprietary, being under development. So they sneak me in. There are haptics and sensors. It's like bursts of air. So when you push against it, you actually feel you're touching somebody or touching a place, a surface. You actually get the feeling of touch in your hands. It's just done by bursts of air. So you can touch. Not only that, the author says, suppose you can not only see and hear, touch, smell. The smell is already there. In some movie theaters, they have little bursts of, but you see there's a flower in the movie and there's a burst of perfume which comes from your seat and you can smell it. And the touch and the feel. They showed me in New Delhi a multi-sensory experience. So Swami Vivekananda jumping from the last bit of Indian soil to swim across into the to the rock where he would meditate. It's three-dimensional and not three-dimensional, virtual reality. You can look around, there are waves and Vivekananda is swimming, you feel you're swimming with it. And they go a bit too far. When he jumps in and water splashes out, you're actually splashed by water. You get burst. I thought that was going a bit too far. You actually get a little bit wet. And now all of that, all the five senses you're surrounded in. You've completely forgotten that you're sitting in a darkened movie theater. Now, little further, imagine all the thoughts of that character, the hero, are in your mind. And imagine there's a darkness which veils the idea that you're sitting and watching a movie. Now the thoughts of the hero come into your mind. The feelings of the hero come into your mind. A set of memories which are in the heroes, the character, they are put into your mind. And you've forgotten you're sitting and watching this movie. What will happen to you? You'll be completely immersed in it. Yet all the while being none of it. And what's the contribution of the person sitting and watching all this? You. You are actually powering all of it by your own awareness. Without you, the awareness, suppose you fall asleep, then the whole movie will disappear. Suppose it's a very boring character. But so you are the one who's making it all happen, and yet you have completely forgotten yourself. You've taken on the character upon. The one sadhu in the Himalayas, still remember his voice, is Dikhta hai Mahatma ji, hai kuch nahi. All of this appears, oh monk, it doesn't exist. What exists? You exist. And you are appearing as all of this. But having forgotten all this, what is the link between you and that movie character? He says ignorance, stupidity. Once you become aware, I am the awareness in which all of this is appearing, and I am just this awareness. The rest of it, you'll have a clear break between you and this rest. How will this link between you, the pure consciousness, and this ego go? By knowledge. What knowledge? I am not it. Ashtavakra sings. So all of what we have done in the morning, Ashtavakra puts in 2 verses. This is the background to what Ashtavakra says. Natvam deho nate deha karta bhokta nava bhavan chidruposi sada sakshi nirapeksha sukham chara. You are not this body. It's a 3-dimensional, it's a VR, virtual reality product. Huh? You are not only not this body is not yours. We say, yeah, I know I'm not the body, but it's my body. We all say that. Body is not yours. Really? That doesn't seem logical. No, it isn't. Why do you think it's yours? Show me the papers which say it's your body. If you're pulled over and the cops say you produce a driving license, not the license, I want this body, the vehicle you are in. That vehicle, who gave it to you? Where are the papers? Did you purchase it? No. Did you make it? No. Nature made it. Even your parents didn't make it. Nature made it. Do you own the materials out of which this body is made? No. Does it respond to you? You're in charge of it, right? So that's why you think it's yours. Not really. Very little of it, even our so-called conscious control of the body. Right now I'm sitting and speaking to you. One little stroke, one little, something happens in the brain. With all my effort, I will not be able to speak Vedanta to you. I will not even be able to use this hand. I will not be able to recall the words of Vedanta also. None of it is in our control. Even little bit which seems to be in our control is an illusion generated by the body itself, by nature. None of it is in our control. The involuntary parts are clearly not in our control, which is most of it. Even the voluntary parts are only illusorily under our control. It's powered by nature. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Prakrityeva karmani kriyamanani sarvasha. Everything in this universe is being done by nature. It just sounds like materialistic reductionist science. Yes, everything here is done by nature. Yapashyati tathatmanam akartaram sapashyati. The one, Krishna says to Arjuna, the one who understands this sees that one does not do anything. You are not the doer of any action at all. You are that which is aware, which reveals this play going on. So it's not the body, it does not belong to you. Nate deha. Therefore, you are neither the doer nor the experience. You are not the doer of actions nor the experiencer of the effects of actions. But you are at least experiencing it. No, you only seem to be. You are the awareness which reveals the movie which is being played out to you. If this is too much, you can still say, body belongs to God. God made the universe. God has made this body. That's also more true. More true than saying the body belongs to me. That's not true at all. Then further, yeah, but the mind is, I'm at least the mind. No, the next verse Ashtavakra sings. He says, Raga dvesho mano dharmo namanaste kadachana nirvikalposi bodhatma nirvikara sukham chara. Likes and dislikes, thoughts, memories, love, hate, desire, my own story, all of that. It's not you, it's not in you, it belongs to the mind. See, put things where they belong. Manodharma, they are characteristics of the mind, they are possessions of the mind. Why are you stealing them? They belong to the mind. Let them be in the mind. They're part of the movie. Let them be in the movie. Why are you taking it upon yourself? They belong to the mind. Okay, but the mind belongs to me, right? The next Ashtavakra says, Na manaste kadachana. The mind is not yours. It never was and never will be. Just like a thing there, the mind is like that. Even the mind is not yours. Not one thought, not one memory, not one bit of the story, not anything that we call life is yours actually. It all happened. It all appearing, but it's not yours. Alright, body is not mine, mind is not mine. That's very scary. What am I? Nirvikalposi bodhaka. First he said, Chidruposi sada sakshi. You are the light, nature of light, ever the witness, never the witnessed, ever the witness. Your awareness itself. Isn't it depriving myself of so many things? No, all of it belongs to you, and yet you're free of all of it. You are going to experience the whole movie. You're going to enjoy and get your money's worth out of it. Now you are going to get your money's worth out of it because you know you're free of it. Otherwise, it's a tragedy. You're caught in it. You are sent from the morning show to the afternoon show to the matinee show to the evening show. I don't know if they still have these shows, but anyway. But now you realize, oh, there are movies playing upon me, the awareness. So none of it. You are of the nature of light, ever shining. Chidruposi sada sakshi, ever shining, choicelessly shining. What do I do then? Nirapeksha, you're independent. You don't depend on the world, you don't depend on the body, you don't even depend on the mind. You have your own existence complete. They depend on you. Without you, they don't exist at all. Nirapeksha, then what do you do? Most brilliant, most repeated words advised by Ashtavakra. Sukham chara, be happy. Do what? Chara, go about your life. This very life, it doesn't belong to you. This appearance. Watch the movie. Do exactly what's going on. There's no problem. The most humble kind of work is as good as the greatest work. The most ordinary humdrum life is as fine as the most dramatic, adventurous, and extraordinary glamorous life. They're all appearance to you who are infinite. You don't depend upon the world to give you glamour. You don't depend on the world to give you beauty. You don't depend upon the world to give you happiness. It's all yours. The world just reflects it back to you. Sukham chara. Live out this life. Swami Vivekananda says, heed no more than how body lives or goes. Its task is done. It was a crucible, a mold to set you free, to give you enlightenment. Its task is done. Let karma float it down, he says. Enjoy the remaining part of this game. This game is coming to an end. Really, if you have heard Ashtavakra, if you have heard Advaita Vedanta, it's a sign that the game is coming to an end. This is like a finishing school of spirituality. You don't have to do anything else. Once we have heard this is a great sign. This life, at the most, one more life. And it's over. Oh, that sounds very disappointing. It's over. No. We'll be released into infinitude. If you want after that, have as many lives as you like. There will be no problem at all. You're not trapped in prison anymore. And then Ashtavakra says, Nirvikalposi bodhatma. You are of the nature of consciousness. What kind of consciousness? Nirvikalpa. See, the mind attains Nirvikalpa Samadhi when all the mortification cease. Chitta vritti nirodha. That is called the Nirvikalpa avastha of the mind. There's no this or that. It's permanently steady at that point. But our very nature is always Nirvikalpa. As consciousness, we are always in it. There is no second, there is no alternative, there is no change, there is not going from this to that, there is no increase, no diminution. That Nirvikalpa nature is already ours choicelessly. Nirvikalpa bodhatma. Then what am I? You're not mind, you're consciousness. Bodhatma. Nirvikara, free from all kinds of modification, all kinds of problems actually. What do? Again, sukham chara. Live happily. Go about. Enjoy your meals, talk to people, smile at. I heard a beautiful story about Swami Shraddhananda ji. Swami who, I never saw him, but it seems that he used to go sometimes into the airport and welcome passengers coming. Welcome, he would say. So who's this funny old man with a bright smile? Welcome. You may not do that. I mean, don't try. Today the TSA won't take kindly to that. But see the joy of that person. It's an unending flow of bliss from within. So it says, Prabodhacha, this illumination will set you, the pure consciousness, free from that pest of an ego. That's the third relationship. And the third question. Because this is the second question. What does Vedanta do? It cuts that relationship. You don't have to cut the relationship between ego and the body. When the body dies, the ego will leave this body. You don't have to cut the relationship between reflected awareness and the ego. It is there. As long as ego is there, reflected awareness will be there. You have to cut the relationship between the capital I and the small I, between the capital S and the small s, between the real you and the ego. How do you do that? That's just by the realization I am not it. And then everything will continue as it is. Not the slightest thing will change. The world will appear again, the body will continue, mind will continue, indeed ego will continue. Sri Ramakrishna says, the ego doesn't disappear. After enlightenment, the ego doesn't disappear. Why will it disappear? After enlightenment, do you have a kidney failure? Will your kidney stop working? Will your liver stop working? No. Will your brain become brain dead? No. Everything will work as before. If the brain is working, the mind is working, memory is working, ego will also work. But you know you are not the ego anymore. You know you are not that I. That accounts for the strange language used by enlightened people often. Sri Ramakrishna sometimes would slip up and say this, not I. Sometimes he would say I. But when the enlightened person says I and when we say I, there's a big difference. When we say I, we literally mean I am this body mind, this one. That's I. When the enlightened person says I, that is just used for conversing with us. In Panchadashi, the author discusses this. The three uses of the term I. I means ego. The three uses. For the ignorant, I means only this body mind, just as we are right now. For the enlightened, second use and third use. Second use is the primary use, mukhya. Primary use is aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. The ego points, ego is not Brahman, ego points to Brahman, it refers to Brahman. I am Brahman, you know who you are. And third use, transactional use. Enlightened person dealing with the rest of us. When Ashtavakra says sukham chara, live happily. One condition of living happily is you have to interact in the movie. So in the movie you have to behave as that virtual character, one which you are assigned to in the movie. You behave like that. So that will be the meaning of I used by the enlightened person versus the ego I used by an unenlightened. Now the third and fourth questions, simple questions, we will deal with them quickly. What about waking, dreaming, deep sleep? The answer is simple. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep are not states of consciousness. This has to be repeated again and again. Many books, and in general way we speak about consciousness, waking consciousness, dream consciousness, deep sleep. That's because consciousness has not been sufficiently distinguished from the mind. But these are states of the mind. In Vedanta, we're very clear. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep are states of the mind. Consciousness is constant. This is the whole message of Mandukya Upanishad. Waking, dreaming, deep sleep, they point to one witness consciousness. One sadhu in Uttarakhand, known as a great Vedanta, he would live on a, what is a charpoy, like a cot under a tree. Didn't even have a hut or a cave. He would live on a cot under a tree, day and night. And he had only a loincloth and no other possessions. So somebody asked him, you are a Vedantin. The Vedantins have lots of books. Where are your books? You're supposed to read a lot of books. Where are your books? He said, oh, I have books. Where are your books? I have 3 books. And I read them every day. You know what they are? Waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. These are the 3 books I read every day, and they tell me who I am. I am the 4th Turiya consciousness. That's what they are telling me every day. So 10th verse. Ahankara laye sukto. Ahankara laye sukto. Bhaved dehopya chetana. Bhaved dehopya chetana. Ahankara vikasartha. Ahankara vikasartha. Swapna sarvastu jagaraha. Swapna sarvastu jagaraha. The ego, when it falls asleep, that means when the mind falls asleep, that's called deep sleep. When it's partially active means it's not in connection with sense organs. It's just active within itself. The ego then is active in the mind is active, but not the sense organs. That's called dream. And when the sense organs kick into action and we feel we are communicating with an external world, that's called waking. And all of these are states of the mind. Consciousness is one and same all throughout. The difference would be the Sankhyan would say in a waking state, there is an external world out there. You, the consciousness, with the help of a body-mind, provided by nature, Prakriti, you are experiencing nature. It's real. It's out there. And you are consciousness, apart from it. This is like modern panpsychism. Advaita Vedanta would say go a little further. It's not outside. All of this universe, this body, and the mind, and nature itself is an appearance in you, the limitless consciousness. That's the only difference. There was this Pandit, I will not take his name. So also to prove that all of this depends on, there's a big difference in the spiritual attitude and non-spiritual attitude. This Pandit, he was a great Pandit, one of the greatest of his generation. He was the president of the Pandit Council. And so at one time I happened to be on the stage with him. He was more than 90 years old and hard of hearing. So, and it was a difficult time to get him on the stage. So they got him on the stage well before the program started. The audience was not there. I was the next speaker. So I went and sat next to him. And I asked a question. And you have to yell it because he's hard of hearing. So I yelled into his ear, what's the difference between Advaita and Sankhya? What's the difference? Non-dualism and dualistic Sankhya. And he said, what's that? And then he said in Bengali, Drishtir Parthakya. The difference in only perspective. You see, it's a big answer because if you go to a philosophy book, there'll be pages after pages of discussion on the differences between Advaita and Sankhya. There age-long quarrels and all of that. Shankaracharya spends page after page in the Brahma Sutras attacking and disproving Sankhya. But from a spiritual perspective, it's a perspectival change. That's all. Not really a very big change. Philosophically big differences. And he's the Pandit who said it. But why am I saying spiritual perspective? What's the problem? So this Pandit, the funny part of it, that's why I'm not naming him. He was a great, renowned scholar. Sankhya, Vedanta, Saptatitra. So he, in his old age, he became interested and proficient. I mean, spent all his time in astrology, which he was also very good at. He was consulted by some of the biggest movie stars and all. The biggest movie star in India flew him on a plane to Mumbai to arrange for the marriage of his son with the biggest film actress in India. I'm not going to name any of them. And that was the point of pride of this great Pandit, that this is his great achievement. So somebody asked him, sir, and he yelled, sir, you are such a great scholar of Advaita and Vedanta and Sankhya and Yoga, so why this fascination with astrology? He was like, what's that? Oh, there's no money in those things. He was simple enough. He said, there's a lot of money in astrology. And there's a lot of fame, and there are a lot of people who, politicians and film stars who come to him, they're not interested in Vedanta. He said, I discovered that too late. Then we jump to th verse and end there. Manoham krityupadanam lingam ekam jadatmakam avasthatrayamanvedi jayate priyate tatha. Last question. So what's all this way of, birth and death and many lives and ignorance and illumination, bondage and liberation? Who is the one who's going through all of this? After all, the body dies. Body is born and dies. There's no question of birth and rebirth for the body. The body is dead. And consciousness, you are saying it's one and unchangeable. So consciousness is not born, bodies are born. Ignorance is in the mind. Consciousness is never in ignorance. Who is being born? Who is dying? Who is in ignorance? Who is the one who's turned up to a Vedanta workshop in Sacramento? Is it pure consciousness? Is it just the body? Who is that? And he says the answer is the subtle body. It is you, the consciousness, reflected in the mind as the reflected consciousness. And there's ignorance in the mind, which makes the ego think, I am the mind body. This one is called the jiva, the sentient being. It's exactly us, in the state of ignorance. In the state of enlightenment, it still be like this, but you will know who you are. Movie will go on, but you will know and you will be free of it. But when you don't know it, then what happens to us is, this body dies, and I still feel identified with one mind, one personality. That subtle body, like that little girl who left. So we leave this body, and we go on to other lives. We have come to this body like that also, propelled from the past. What is the fuel which propels us? Past karma. So here Advaita Vedanta accepts the entire life, many deaths, sentient beings seeking moksha, liberation, the whole paraphernalia which is accepted by all Eastern religions, and to some extent by the Abrahamic religions also, that we are beings seeking salvation, the Abrahamic language, or we are sentient beings seeking freedom. That Advaita Vedanta says it can go on. That's what happens. That's what is going through lives and deaths. I say, really? Not really. That's the movie. That's the uniqueness of Advaita Vedanta. You actually have had no births and deaths. You always were free. That's what you realize when you become enlightened. When we become enlightened, it's not that I realize, oh, I was going through so many births and deaths. Now the game of this samsara is over. Now I'm finally free. I have got moksha, mukti, nirvana. No, that's not what happens. What happens is you realize you always were free. It was a movie all throughout. All of this universe and all beings that you know, all that you love and you hate, all of them are eternally one with you. You alone are all of that. And for a time being, the movie will continue. After that, it's your wish whether you want to see some more shows of that or you don't want to. It's the same. You are free of it. Some want to retreat into their infinite nature. Some want to watch the movie consciously and enjoy it for the first time. All right. Now we'll take up a few questions. We have a little bit of time. Here, can you get a? We'll give preference to people who have not asked questions. The gentleman. Next. Did you ask a question? You've not been the lady who's there in the back. Yes, please tell us your name and ask a question.
My name's Trevor. Thanks so much for being here. My wife and I really enjoy you on YouTube. It's good to see you. My question is about, having investigated and knowing myself as the witness or the perceiver, and that's unchanging and impersonal in not having qualities of this body or anything like that. But the perceptions seem to be only associated with this body-mind. But not the perceiver not being located. When we did this little thing earlier of like, is it here or there? Like, I can feel that the perceptions don't actually happen anywhere associated with this body. But somehow, I'm not experiencing the perceptions of all the other bodies. So how, maybe it's too non-dual or something like that.
So the question is, I can understand myself as this witness consciousness in this body-mind. But still, the idea that I am the one consciousness in all bodies and minds, that seems to be a little theoretical. If it were true, I would be able to see and hear and smell and taste and touch through all bodies and minds. So that doesn't seem to be happening. I'm only seeing it through one body mind. But notice, our dream experience, I'll give you the Advaitic answer first, then I'll give you a little few variations of how that can actually be possible. Our dream experience. When I dream, I've forgotten that I'm sleeping on the bed, and a dream world comes up before me. I see people, places, things that are happening, and I have a body there too. The thing is, all people there and all places and whatever is there in the dream is entirely in me, the dreamer's mind. Yet, in the dream, I take the perspective of one body mind. I don't feel that I'm like a God's eye vision. I see through all bodies and minds in a dream. I still see one. If you have a virtual reality movie, the kind I talked about, you would still have the perspective of the virtual world from one that character's perspective. They call them avatars.
Right.
So you have a character in that, and you walk around. So that's the Advaitic answer. Even if you are one consciousness in all bodies and minds, when you actually experience things, then the experience will always be subject-object. So you'll be located as a subject and everything else will be an object to you. You say that, no, but they are all subjects. But we know that theoretically. If you look around yourself, you see so many people. Swami, are they all objects? If you take a literal phenomenological description of what you are experiencing, you must admit they are all appearing as objects to you. You see them, at the most we can see their behavior. We can hear their language. But I can't experience anyone's consciousness the way I'm experiencing this consciousness here. Consciousness is never an object. Even if you were a telepath, you would look into all of us and see our thoughts, but as objects. You would not see our thoughts as us. Consciousness never becomes an object. So every kind of experience will always be subject-object, and there will always be one subject, and everything else will be an object to that subject, like our dream experience. This is exactly what's going on. That still doesn't mean that there is no one consciousness. Now still push it further. Yeah, granted, that's philosophically neat, but is it not possible to have a view of the universe through everybody's body mind, a God's eye perspective? Like in computers, for example, you can hack into lots of people's computers and you can see it through all computers maybe. Is it possible? Advaita Vedanta is not interested in that, but yoga is. And yoga says it is possible. One sentient being, a yogi, can have extraordinary powers which will enable him, that yogi, to operate the machinery of other people's body minds. That's possible. They even have something called Kaya Vyuha, one sentient being operating a whole host of bodies. Now all of those are in the realm of mysticism, of yogic philosophy. So either you have to experience it for yourself or you have to take it on faith. Advaita Vedanta doesn't go into that area. Advaita sticks to being absolutely rooted in experience and logic. I remember this very touching example I can give. Years ago, the Malaysian Airlines, they lost an aircraft. Not the one which got lost completely, nobody found it. It was one which was, in fact, right where the fighting is going on now, in Ukraine. It was shot down by mistake, by a missile. You remember that? Malaysian Airlines. And later, infamous cases where a plane was lost and nobody ever found it till now. That's the second one. But before that, they lost another aircraft. They seem to have a string of bad luck, And they had this, believe it or not, it was apparently this advertisement. Fly Malaysian and lose yourself. It's a very unfortunate advertisement. I don't know if this is real or joke. Anyway, the story is this. This is a very sad story. After the first plane was shot down, this young man wrote to me from Amsterdam, where that plane had actually taken off from. He said, my girlfriend was on that plane. And my question to you is, if you are one consciousness, can I know her last thoughts? Is it possible? So I had to say no. You are one consciousness, but the minds are different. Knowing something is an activity of the reflected consciousness. So reflected consciousness will be different in each mind. What we just studied, consciousness reflected in one mind, associated with one ego, operates a set of instruments in that body mind and has knowledge there. as experience. That's called a sentient being. So Vedanta says you are actually not that sentient being. You are the sun of consciousness shining in all. But each sentient being from its own level will feel different from each other. So you as a sentient being, you know the contents of your mind, but you don't necessarily know the contents of your girlfriend's mind, let alone the last moment of the life of that being. However, what Vedanta can offer you is you and your girlfriend and everybody else in the universe, you're always one reality. Nothing has been lost there. You say, no, but at least the person has been lost forever. I love that person. The person is lost forever. But the person was never yours. The person is always a work in progress, continuously changing. Which person do you love? You love the baby, the little child, the young woman, the middle-aged woman, the elderly person, when the person is in deep sleep or coma, we are not aware of anything. Which one do you love? Person is a continuously changing thing. So Vivekananda would say, make fun, you Americans are so fond of your individuality. But where is the individual? There Buddhism is very useful. It shows you what a bunch of illusions of so-called individuality is. Where the real individuality lies, Swami Vivekananda said, in the Atman, in pure consciousness. That's the real individual, the rock bottom. Even further, last point I want to make to you. There is actually a philosophical perspective, a tradition which gives an affirmative to your question. Is it possible for a spiritual practitioner, not God, God has a God's eye view for everything, God is omniscient, but I as a yogi can experience through all or at least many bodies and minds? Yes, that also is in affirmation answer is given, not by Advaita Vedanta, but by Kashmiri Shaivism. They have a theory called Purnahanta. The ego, which is cosmic in the sense of identification with all bodies and minds, that Shiva Yogi can actually, in certain circumstances, experience through many bodies and minds what's going on with other sentient beings. But that, you see, that's like a very specialized thing. For us, either you have to take it on faith, or you have to make the requisite sadhanas and experience it for yourself. And Advaita would say, to what purpose? To what purpose? The lady there. Tell us your name and ask the question.
My name is Sajal, and thank you so much for being here with us today. My question is, once we accept this truth that I am that, how does prayer work in this? So, can we pray for enlightenment? And can we pray for suffering of someone or myself to be removed? But who am I praying to if it is myself? Am I asking myself?
Right. So notice the I is very, the Advaitic, the analysis becomes very useful. When you say, I am that, when you say, I am praying for somebody, for myself, or for others, you have shifted the meaning of the I. One to the absolute Aham Brahmasmi. From that perspective, it's not just a question of accepting it. If we realize it, then there will be the absolute oneness with everybody. And everybody will be your emanation or appearance. Why prayer? You will be full of compassion and you'll be like a very benign presence for everybody. You will be the well-wisher for the entire world. Your life will be one continuous prayer for the welfare of the world. So you're one with everybody. But that's not what you mean. When you mean I, Sajal, I pray. Yes, you can. We can. Until that realization, until we get that perspective as a fact, not just as an intellectual assent. Until that time, can you eat? Can you drive? Can you ask a question? Of course. Then why can't you pray? Every activity of the world can go on. Remember, the best way to resolve this problem is by looking at the life and the teachings of people you consider enlightened. Adi Shankaracharya, he is the great master of Advaita Vedanta. He composed some of the most beautiful devotional hymns in Hinduism. We have a collection of hymns called stotras, called Stavananjali. So it's a collection of the most beautiful, sublime hymns in Hinduism from the past 5,000 years, from the Vedic time till today. It's a nice selection. So once I sat down, I started counting how many of those are by Shankaracharya. And I found to my amazement, one man in a 5,000 year history, 1/3 of the hymns are, the selection is from Shankaracharya. And they're all devotional hymns, almost all. That means it's entirely possible to do that. Yeah. But you just shifted the perspective.
So, and follow up to that, is the consciousness going to actually grant the prayer?
No. Notice, the moment you say, your question was, whom am I praying to? Am I praying to myself? The answer would be, I, Sajal, am praying to God. I am Sajal. That means I am this body, I am this person, I have these desires, I have this life, and I see all others, and there's somebody I want to pray about. There is a world, there is Sajal, and then there must be God. If I'm praying, back to devotional religion. What does Advaita do in that case? It just says in the background of God, world, and sentient being is one reality. Jiva, Jagat, Ishvara is one reality, Brahman. So you keep that in mind, but as long as you're acting in the world, you're walking, talking, driving, eating, earning a living, studying Vedanta, you can certainly pray. But then, what would be the impact of Advaita Vedanta? Then our prayers would have to be as great as that, as enlightened as that, welfare of all beings. Not little things. Sri Ramakrishna says, when you go to a king, would you ask for cabbage and pumpkins? No. When you go to the Lord of the universe, who is the Lord of the universe? And this is where Vedanta becomes useful. The philosophy behind it. That one consciousness, in association with one body and mind, is Sajam. That same consciousness, in association with all bodies and minds and entire universe, is God. Technical term for that is Saguna Brahma, Ishvara. The individual jiva can certainly pray, should in fact pray to Saguna Brahma. The greatest gift of Saguna Brahma, of Ishvara, is what? Advaita Vedanta. Avadhuta Gita says, Ishvara anugraha deva pumsam advaita vasana. By the special grace of God, what do we get? A liking for Advaita. We sign up for the Sacramento Vedanta retreat. It says, the Avadhuta Gita starts with that. That's the only time God is mentioned in the whole book. It says, by the special grace of God, we get liking for non-duality. That's the highest truth. We are led up to that in stages. To that. And I'm of course, this is a non-dual retreat, so I'm very partial to non-duality. I like that story about Ramana Maharshi. And somebody from the Ramana Ashram confirmed it is true. Somebody went to Ramana Maharshi, it seems, and said, look, I don't like your who am I and non-duality. I'm a devotee of Narayana, God. So is it alright? He said, yes. Oh, it's alright. If I'm devoted to Narayana, yes. So after death, will I go to Vaikuntha, the heaven, where Lord, God abides? He said, yes. Oh, I will go to Vaikuntha, yes. Will I see Narayana? Will I see Narayana? Ramana Maharshi said, yes. Oh, I will see God in heaven, yes. And will Narayana see me? Will God see me? Yes, he will look at you. He will look at me, yes. Will he speak to me? Will he speak to me? Yes, he will speak to me. What will he say? What will he say? He will say, find out who am I. The gentleman, no, you have already asked that thing, just behind you, yes.
A lady was just
Please take the microphone and tell us your name and ask the question.
Name's Jack. A lady was just leaving, and she said you were discussing the witness consciousness. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, I just want to give you one of my stories of the witness consciousness. It happened in December of 2009. Now, I suppose you don't have cottonwoods in New York, do you? But we do here. There are big trees along the river. And I woke up and I said, another gray and gloomy day. But the witness consciousness says it is not. It's radiantly beautiful. And furthermore, I don't want to hear that anymore.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Let's see, who else? Have you asked a question already?
No.
You haven't. We'll come to you. Did you want to? No. You wanted to. Then we'll come here next.
Namaskar, my name is Sundar, and I discovered you through the YouTube channel, like many others. Who Am I video is one of my favorites, and of course, Swami also, when he introduced you, he mentioned that there's an ebook on Who Am I, right? So my question is actually two parts. So you mentioned that Sarvapriyananda Dhyasana is the pathway, and the Nididhyasana is sort of, the word, the term you used was, is it real for me, right? So if we take Bhagavad Gita to be the condensation of all the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita actually teaches Nididhyasana, interesting enough, as yoga, meditation, because in the 6th chapter, right, it's, if you consider it to be Nididhyasana, it's completely yoga, right? That's one part question. The second question
What is the question there?
Let me come to the next one, next part. The next part is you didn't mention Satchidananda today, but the reality is Satchidananda, right? So you can attend thousands of classes in Vedanta, you will get Sat and Chit easy, no problems. The Ananda is never going to be revealed through the intellectual study. Again, that's why I quoted the 6th chapter of Gita, Sukham Atyantikam, right? So that's, the Ananda aspect is only coming through deep meditation and yoga. So in the Jnana path, they sort of, they don't even seem to consider that Nididhyasana could be just meditation, right, yoga. My question is when is actually the Ananda aspect even revealed through the intellectual vichara, right? Because you're not going to get it through thousands of lectures, right?
So answer is, can you get the Ananda aspect through lectures, through vichara? Certainly, and only through vichara, never through meditation. Or through meditation, what you will get is an experience of the Ananda in the mind. Consider, that's why Ananda is not, we don't start with that because it's difficult to grasp. But I'll give you a little, something to think about. When you say Sat, existence, what do we mean by that? Do we mean existing things? When I say Brahman, ultimate reality is Sat, existence. So the bottle exists, the table exists, the book exists, the body exists. So is this what is meant by existence? They'll say, no, not existing things, but existence itself. Like not ornaments, necklace and bracelet and ring, but gold itself. And the ornaments are not different from the gold. But the gold is certainly distinct from the ornaments. The gold doesn't have to be a particular kind of ornament. Similarly, Vedanta says there is a category called existence. Right? The reality is existence, upon which all existing things depend. All of this is nothing but existence with names and forms. So all of these questions are very interesting, but we have not come to that portion. It will come. Asti bhati priyam, nama rupam. So all of that is there in the 20th verse of this. We'll come to it. Very important verse. There are two important verses in this book. First verse, and I think the 20th one. Asti bhati priyam. Yes, 20th verse. So it's not existing things, it's existence itself. If that makes sense, think about it. Like gold, but not golden ornaments. Like water, but not waves in general. Now come to Chit, consciousness. The moment we say Chit, consciousness, what will consciousness studies people think? What will ordinary people, what will we think when we hear consciousness? Oh, I'm thinking, I'm feeling, I'm seeing, I'm hearing, I'm remembering, I'm enjoying, I'm suffering. This is consciousness. But these are all vrittis of the mind, all illumined by consciousness. None of them, consciousness is none of them. They are all dependent on, just like existing things are dependent on existence, all conscious, all vrittis of the mind, modifications of the mind, all mental events are dependent on consciousness. But they are not consciousness in themselves. They are appearances in consciousness. If you keep this in mind, that Sat means existence itself, not just existing things. Chit means consciousness itself, not just thoughts or feelings. Similarly, Ananda means not pleasant feelings, but that which comes up as joy, peace, bliss, every fulfilling experience in life. It is manifested as those. The relationship between a joyous experience, a pleasant experience, a happy experience, and ananda is exactly like the relationship between a necklace and gold, between a pot and clay. Sat Chit Ananda, Swami Vivekananda said, not that Brahman exists, it is existence itself. Not that Brahman is it knows, it is knowledge itself. Not that Brahman is happy, it is happiness itself. What is happiness itself? What is knowledge itself? What is existence itself? That is the ultimate reality. That's what we are trying to point out. That can never be an object. It takes on an objective form with the help of name and form. Pure being takes on an objective form here. Bottle, name, concept, and there is a particular form to it, which we can sense. Consciousness takes on an objective form, thought, perception, idea, desire. Ananda takes on an objective form, joy, bliss, thrill. Go deeper. All of philosophy is basically three broad streams. Ontology, what used to be called metaphysics earlier. Ontology, the search for what is real. Epistemology, how do we know anything at all? And axiology, value, ethics, goodness, beauty, joy, fulfillment. So, ontology, epistemology, axiology. And the solutions to these three, the ultimate answers in each stream. Ontology, ultimate answer, being, existence. Epistemology, how is any kind of knowledge possible? Chit, consciousness. And axiology, the fulfillment of all aesthetics, of values, of fulfillment in life is Ananda. Sat Chit Ananda. This is the ultimate solution to all philosophical questions, philosophically speaking. What is Ananda in Vedanta? It is actually the infinitude of existence consciousness. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. That Anantam itself is Ananda. It does not say Satchidananda. It says Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Infinite existence, infinite consciousness. That infinitude itself of existence and consciousness means Ananda. Swami Vivekananda says, where rolls the river of knowledge, truth, and bliss that follows both. In Song of the Sannyasi. Proof, Upanishad itself, Yo vai bhuma tat sukham, nalpe sukham asti. Chandogya Upanishad says, the unlimited, the vast alone is bliss. There is no bliss in the limited. But there is a reflection of bliss in the limited. There is limited, like a spray, so Shankaracharya says, there is an ocean of bliss within you, the spray of which is what people in the world are mad after. Sensory pleasure, money, achievement, popularity, life itself. That bliss, it's the spray of an ocean which already exists within you. Within you means as you. Okay, so this is Advaitika Ananda. This is the nature of ultimate reality is Ananda. But what you're talking about is, I have to feel it. Our demand is, that is very philosophical, but I must feel joy. Are you saying that there is only this philosophical, limitless existence consciousness? That is Ananda. Is there no payoff at the end of all the spiritual life? I must be very happy, right? I must be really happy. First of all, don't worry, you will be happy. The proof, look at the lives of all the saints. They were the happiest people. Whether you go by the path of bhakti, whether you go by the path of meditation, or by the path of jnana, or karma, or harmonize all of them, the result will be first and foremost, you will be happy. Selfless work, karma yoga makes you happy. Selflessness is more paying than selfishness. Swami Vivekananda says it requires some maturity to understand this. Devotion to God, love of God, leads to ananda, joy. The greatest bhakti. Bhakti actually is a direct method to joy. You forget all this philosophy. Right now you want to be endlessly happy, consistently happy. What is the way? Fall in love. With whom? With God.. Then yoga. There is a bliss of samadhi, 6th chapter. And Vedanta, it shows you the source of all of this. The source of all of this, which is the real Ananda. Taittiriya Upanishad, and Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, infinite existence consciousness is bliss, or is infinite existence consciousness is Brahman. Then a few sections later, Anuvakas later, the 8th Anuvaka, it says the name for this is Anandam Brahma. There is Ananda Mimamsa in the end of Taittiriya Upanishad, the 2nd chapter, an analysis of Ananda. Yeah. So that Ananda, the infinite Ananda which is ourself, is revealed by Vichara. Enabled by meditation, no doubt. Without meditation, we say, so can it be done just by a lecture, no meditation? But why would you want that? I'll make up your mind, I'm going to only listen to lectures and I will not meditate. One Swami used to scold us when we were young novices in Belur Math, used to say, see, we must understand what people mean when they are speaking. When you fellows, when you say, this meditation all is selfish, I will do Swami Vivekananda's work, you'll understand that fellow is restless, he doesn't want to meditate. And you fellow, when you want to say that, no, by meditation I will get samadhi and realize God, this work and all this is preparatory, preliminary. Understand that fellow is lazy. He doesn't want to shirk work. And when you say, I am Brahman, this is the highest truth, Upanishads have said that, he said, you have to understand that the rascal has not the least faith in God. So, that is where we are beginning. So we have to be careful. All of this. That's why as novices, our seniors in our ashrams always insist, no matter what your philosophy, that's your private matter, but you will get up early in the morning and come for meditation. You will turn up for daily Shastra classes. And you will come for Karma Yoga. Everybody must do some work in the ashram. Meditation and study is no excuse for it. And you will turn up for evening arati and bhakti and puja and all of that is compulsory. No, we know where the Swami Vivekananda said, I know where the shoe pinches. It's not in philosophy. Our level, we have to know where to start. One sadhu in Uttarakhand put it very beautifully. He said, अपने जीवन की सच्चाई स्वीकार करना बहुत भारी चीज है महात्मा जी. To acknowledge the truth of our own lives is a great thing, O monk. It's a very worthwhile thing. You don't have to acknowledge it to anybody else, but let's acknowledge it to ourselves and then make slow and steady progress in this path. Glory is there for us. Peace is there for us. We cannot fail, because Advaita Vedanta, one thing it does is it assures us it's our own reality. You can never ever lose it. So it's there for us. But we must make it honestly, visibly, most directly our own. With that prayer, to one more question. Can we ask? Yes, this lady here. We'll end with this. We'll take it also.
Thank you for
Tell us
coming.
your name and other question.
Denise Giusti. So my question is from a YouTube that you've done, and I'm just happy to be able to ask it. You said something about Maya having two powers, two functions. One was the projecting power and one was the veiling power. And I wrote down, these are my notes from that day, how do we overcome the veiling power of Maya?
Oh, I'm glad you asked this. This is the very next verse of this book, which I didn't literally, we came up to the 12th verse. We came to the 12th verse. The 13th verse, Maya has two powers. Shakti dvayam hi mayaya, vikshepavriti rupaka. What are those two powers of Maya? How they project this universe and veil the reality from us? How do we pierce through that veil? You're welcome to listen to the remaining lectures. They are there online, and if we come back next year, maybe we can take up this other side of it. That's on the other side of the hill. That's the non-dual side of it. I'm not going to talk about it today.
I realized that this was beyond, but so it is online, that answer?
All that, yes.
Oh.
It's you have to go to the 13th verse onwards.
Okay.
Onwards.
I'll find that. Thank you so much for
Thank you so much. Om Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat Shri Ram